Hey, it's your buddy Peace and Harmony with you here today. Zooming in on the topic of the covert narcissist marriage and relationship issues there. The covert narcissist is typified by a couple, really hallmark traits, and that is one of self-importance, really, a selfishness, but not just ordinary selfishness like, I want to do this, I want to do that, this is important to me, but it's really a selfishness to the point where it's really detrimental and hurtful to others. So that's when, a person becomes like narcissistic to the point where it becomes an issue, and the person who's involved with them, their spouse, the fiance, the one who's dating them, or perhaps even another family member, becomes concerned or hurt because their selfishness is having a toxic effect. They're either exploiting them, they're violating them in some way, their boundaries, they're exploiting their needs by making them work too hard for them and not letting them essentially live their own life. They're treating them as an extension of them. So rather than being allowed to go out and live their life freely, they're expected to do all these sort of behaviors or be involved in all these different things which are contrary to their own best interests, which, is harmful to them, but it's really only to satisfy the narcissist, because the narcissist would be pleased and satisfied if you were to do and be all these things. So it really becomes a toxic issue when their selfishness, when their self-centeredness really results in this negative treatment, and really what also is known as neglect or abandonment, which means they're not there to utilize empathy, which is the other deficit, the other issue that we have going on here. And I hope you're able to really understand these dynamics and how they work and how they play out in your unique situation. But, the lack of empathy means basically they're not able to identify and relate with your needs, wishes, desires, and interests. They're not able to get it. They're not able to pick up on it. They're not able to acknowledge it. They're not able to affirm it. They're not able to applaud it and say, I get that. Let's do this. Let's change this up. So if you're feeling like there's this disconnect between you and this covert narcissist, it's usually generally tied directly to this empathy deficit. And really, one of the main issues we see in the covert narcissist, relationship dynamics is that, one's boundaries are become violated, and you're not allowed to become your own person. You're not allowed to speak up. You're not allowed to, discuss your opinions, emotions while getting the time of day. You're minimized, and really this violation becomes a boundary violation. So in essence, you can't declare where you begin and end. And it's a very sort of, it's a difficult to acknowledge sort of thing. It's a difficult concept, but you really need to understand what a boundary means. So a boundary is where you essentially possess yourself. It's where you exist. It's your identity. It's who you are. It's what you're about. It's your feelings. It's your passions. It's what you're interested in. It's what you bring to the table. It's your personality. And your boundaries can be violated in a covert narcissist relationship because they just don't acknowledge them. And it's almost it almost is dissolved by apathy. So rather than mirroring it back to you, giving that to you, trying to bring it out of you, they just don't. They withdraw. They don't do that because to them, they really have a pre-calculated methodology of basically ignore it and it will go away. So I was, think of that as a very important sort of situation. So ignore it, in other words, if I ignore this person, they'll eventually go away. But see, this is very destructive and very hurtful in a relationship if you're intimately involved with them. I mean, if this is your spouse, this is your parent, this is your sibling, or even in, employment relations where if you have a covert narcissist boss or associate and they essentially want to ignore you, this is not healthy. This is not tolerable. This is not cool because essentially you're becoming, subservient to them, controlled by them, manipulated by them, and this tactic. furthermore, when it comes to covert narcissist relationships, there becomes this, in the beginning, there becomes this oceanic feeling, this, feeling of like, ultimate and eternal love. And John Bradshaw describes this in his book, Healing the Shame That Binds You, and that there's this oceanic feeling, which means it's a dissolving of boundaries, which means, that we don't know where you end and I begin, and it's just like this, overwhelming feeling of passion, love, sexuality, all that good stuff, which is like falling in love. But then, eventually, as the people mature, they need to have some boundaries. And the covert narcissist, you need to kind of like mature a little bit and have like some definition to this. Like, we can't just exist in this oceanic, state forever. We're going to grow and we're going to mature and we're going to maybe have a family and kids and do this and that and travel. And we need to work some things out here. We need to say, whoa, I want to do this or I want to do that. And so there has to be that give and take and then that acknowledgement of each other. So if there's not the declaration of those boundaries, what happens then is you then begin to develop that more of an attachment bond, or someone is getting lost in the shuffle. Someone is getting, someone is getting ignored. Someone is getting betrayed because someone in a relationship with a covert narcissist, that person who is underneath, essentially serving the supply, the one who's conceding, the one who's appeasing the other all the time, acquiescing is another term I've heard used, giving in, bowing to them, like just giving up what they want for them. But what happens is it's not a compromise, like a once in a while experience. It becomes a perpetual and then pathological basis. So there's, we always have to keep in mind there's normal and then there's abnormal. And it really becomes a problem when it becomes abnormal or pathological, or to the point where someone is really, getting hurt and violated. And, when you have a spouse relationship, it can become where essentially one is the parent and then one is almost like a child in a covert narcissist relationship. And then, essentially one is above and using, the covert narcissist is becoming the adult, and then the victim or the codependent or the supply, that person in the dynamic, is becoming like the child. And it continues like this shame-based model where it's like you're the child and you're controlled and you don't know better, and you're going to be, you're going to feel a sense of shame and like attachment to them, like they're above you, like you're always appeasing them. So it's very important, I think, if you are noticing this in the relationship, to really kind of call a halt to it and realize, whoa, no more, this can't continue in this direction. Is we're just going to perpetuate the wound and our imbalance here. And we need to declare some boundaries, and we need to realize that like there's two people who have some input here, and then we're valuable because two is better than one. And each of us are bringing in our own strengths and talents into our relationship and to our family, and we need to speak up and have this acknowledged and be given just as much weight in the relationship. So look for these dynamics. Make sure that each is able to really have a place and a part, especially if you're the traumatized one. Really look at really doing some of those beginning steps of healing and realizing that you need to become a little bit more independent, individualized, autonomous, your own person, and make sure you have tools, using the tools that we discussed here on this channel to make that happen. Peace and harmony with you here today. I hope these videos do help. Please share and please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support.